I've still got more coming through.
Yes.
Start. Good morning, everyone. Wow, big voice. Good morning, everyone. That was like the voice of God. Quite scary. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on a very cold London morning to discuss a very cold. I started early with don't reveal the politics. Okay. Michael Gove said that he was sick of experts, but we're very lucky to have some experts here with us today. Before I do that, I should just say, everyone turn off your phones, please, if you could. If there is a fire back down the stairs, that's my housekeeping bit done. Good housekeeping? Nods. Okay, good. So the experts we have with us today, this is Dr. Sarah Lieberman. She's Programme Director and Senior Lecturer of Politics and International Relations at Canterbury Christ Church University. She has 11 years' experience in international relations and politics. And Louise Haycock, who is a Director and Solicitor at Lieberman. She has 12 years' experience. So I think we can agree that we are experted up to the hilt. I am here to ask the stupid questions. So that you guys don't feel bad, I will ask the dumb questions. If you'd like to submit a question, anonymously or put your name to it, you can. You can email, and the people on the live stream, there are about 100 people here, but about 500-600 people watching on a live stream. You can submit questions via an email address, and you're going to love me for this, Carolyn. It's carolyn@workable.com. So feel free to email Carolyn a lot. That's L-Y-N as well, Carolyn. Cool. So to start then, Sarah, should we start with you?
You can if you like, yes.
Back in 2016, the UK had a referendum.
It did indeed.
It did.
It did, yes.
Well, you'll notice we're all going to struggle to be not political, because I should just say the point of this is to discuss recruitment and how it's going to affect retention of your staff. So we won't be debating the politics of it, the various merits or non-merits of UK leaving the EU. I just want to, I have to headline, that's my heavy caveats about everything. So we will just be saying Sarah if she gets a bit too crazy about it. But still, so in 2016 we voted for that referendum. Start with that. How did that come about? Where did all this happen from, Sarah?
It probably started in the 1970s, to be honest. When we joined the EU in 1973 and immediately had a referendum, in 1974, over whether or not we should stay in the EU at that point. So we joined the EU already thinking about referendums, and it kind of carried on from there. There's always been a very heavily Eurosceptic branch of both the British public and the British government on both sides, Labour and Conservative. You know, both parties have had a Eurosceptic part throughout the UK's history with the EU. So that hasn't changed. What did change was the rise of the UKIP party and the success that it began to have. Now, whether that was due to things that were actually happening in Europe or more due to things that were happening in Britain is anyone's guess, really. But what we do know is that the UKIP party began to win seats in the European Parliament and also local council seats, etc. So they were getting a lot more public legitimacy, I suppose. And the Conservative Party, feeling slightly threatened by that, began to take on some of their policies as well, and because it was really Conservative seats that UKIP were beginning to infringe on. One of the ways to counter that, obviously, was for the Conservative Party to start asking the public what they wanted about Europe. You know, why are you voting UKIP? Is it because you really do dislike the EU? Do you want to come out of the EU? And there you have your referendum question.
Nice.
I would say since then everything's become less clear. We've had 2 years to understand exactly what's happening, and throughout those 2 years the questions have become more and more difficult. It's become less and less clear, not more and more clear. So 2 years ago just now, in the run-up to the referendum, it seemed very clear that either we would remain in the EU or we would leave the EU.
Yeah.
And anybody who's turned on the television, turned on the radio, or opened any newspaper in the last few months will know that that is no longer the question. It has become a lot more difficult. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
I think so. What's the relationship been like between Britain and the EU? So since the 70s, we've come to the party and then said, we might leave. We're sort of half with our coat on.
Yeah. Britain tried to join for a decade before it managed to join. So they started trying to join the EU in, I think 1961 was their first, when they first started negotiating entry into the EU. France said no in 1963 and 1967, and in 1969, once Charles de Gaulle was no longer president of France, Britain managed to start negotiating entry into the EU. And it seemed hugely positive. It was something Britain had been wanting to do for over a decade. When they did join, there was then, Britain was going through, their oil crisis, sort of nights without electricity, just domestic problems again. And it was the Labour Party at that point promised a referendum, because the Conservatives hadn't offered a referendum on joining. The Labour Party offered a referendum on whether or not it was a good idea to remain in. 65% of the population said yes, and on we went. And to be honest, since then, Britain was a really strong member of the EU. Britain hasn't been seen within the EU institutions as a difficult member at all. Britain tends to apply legislation as and when it's asked. Britain comes up with good ideas. Britain's a good trade partner. Britain isn't an obstructive member. And you have to remember there's Eurosceptic factions in all EU member states. So we're not special in the sense that there was some Eurosceptics and some pro-Europeans. Britain has been a very good EU member state, and Britain has had fantastic opportunities through membership and a fantastic membership of the EU. Britain has, because it is such a positive member of the EU and brings such a lot to the table, the EU has given Britain whatever it wants throughout its membership. So it actually has terms of membership that no other member state has, a really favourable membership tailored exactly to Britain.
So we've got everything we wanted.
Yeah, basically we have everything we wanted right up to when David Cameron went to the EU and asked for those red lines to be applied shortly before calling the referendum. Everything he asked for, he got then as well, except for separating the four freedoms, which means that we cannot carry on having free trade with the EU but restrict the amount of migrant workers that come into Britain. And that was one red line too far for the EU. Nobody gets to do that, including Britain.
Yeah. Okay. So after the referendum was called, what has been happening? Sort of a very crazy. We've got
what has been happening? Yeah.
So where are we now? That's a big question. It's a very big
question. We're now at a point that I don't think anybody foresaw happening so late. I mean, 2 years in, nothing, absolutely nothing, has been resolved. We're now at a point where it's more open and there seems to be more options than there was immediately after the referendum. The government has consistently picked up, hugely surprising issues that we'd identified, as academics. We identified that the border in Ireland was going to be a problem, from as soon as the referendum was called. People were saying, we're looking at a return to the Troubles in Ireland. You can't put a hard border back in Ireland. What about the Good Friday Agreement? What about, the issues that we've had with Northern Ireland forever? Galileo and the European Space Agency. That appeared, suddenly the Cabinet noticed that was going to be a problem. Whereas that was something, again, that, you can't assume that Britain will carry on being a member of European institutions once it's left the European Union. So even the ones that aren't officially, aren't necessarily part of the governing structure of the European Union, if it's attached, it is still going to be difficult for Britain to work with them post-referendum. So immediately after the referendum, it was kind of put to the British public. It was merely a question of do you want to be in or do you want to be out? You know, black and white. It's very simple. And now we're at a point where we have, I saw this morning, I was just in the metro when I was on the train. There's only 34 days, I think, when Parliament is meant to be sitting before the big day when
And we're,
Britain leaves.
65 days away now from Article 50.
Yeah, 65 days, but only 34 actual parliamentary working days because they have the February half-term holiday. So they won't be
Do they get half-term?
They get half-term. I don't get half-term. The government do, apparently. So they've got 35 days, and the whole of Parliament at the moment is thinking about amendments that they might want to make to Theresa May's Plan B, which next week the Speaker has to agree which of those the MPs will get to vote on, and then they will vote on whether or not they will accept Plan B with amendments. We're now at a point where we don't know what those amendments will be because they haven't yet all been tabled.
Okay.
We sort of know who might table amendments and what they might be, but no, we don't know what they are. And so literally it's all up in the air. So when I was asked to do this several months ago, it was much clearer than it was
Sorry,
this
everyone.
morning. When we were desperately, checking Twitter and checking BBC News for updates, so 20 minutes ago, because that is how close we are now and how uncertain things are. So we have Plan B, which didn't look a lot different to Plan A, which will be amended, but we don't know what the amendments are. We don't know what the Speaker which amendments the Speaker will allow MPs to vote on, and we don't know how they will vote.
Great, thanks for coming, everyone. That's really, it's made it so simple. So there are loads of different plans. I've heard Norway plus plus, a super Canada, which sounds much cooler. It's super.
Yeah, super Canada.
So what do you think is most likely? I know we had this before, and I guess at this point, for the people here who are trying to negotiate this mountain of changing stuff in front of them, it's like proceeding down a path most likely.
Yeah.
What do we think it's going to look like? Either we...
It depends if you mean long term or short term. In the short term, I have no idea. It could be anything. In the short term, the only two options currently appear to be sticking with what we have got and going to absolutely nothing, because there is no deal on the table. There is no deal that, MPs have already voted against Theresa May's deal, which apparently was the best deal open, the best deal that she could get. So that's the best deal she could find for Britain that worked within the EU's laws. So MPs have already voted against that. So that looks like that's off the table, which leaves us with no deal at all, which nobody really knows what that would look like, because there are no states, I think, and even North Korea has some trade deals. Even North Korea trades with China and has trade deals with China. We have no individual trade deals at the moment because all our trade deals are negotiated through the EU. If we leave the EU, we leave all those trade deals. So it's very difficult to say what trade will look like or what a state will look like with no trade deals at all. It's difficult to predict. So
there's nothing to look at and say that's what it will be like.
And say, this is what it's going to be. A trade deal takes, the EU, for instance, the EU has the best trade negotiators in the world working for it. That's what the EU is. It's a trade body. It's taken 9 years so far to negotiate the free trade deal they have with Canada that you've just mentioned. Britain doesn't have trade negotiators anymore because the EU's done all its trade negotiating since the early 1970s. So negotiating deals, and they would have to be, bilateral deals with each state because we're no longer part of a bloc. So if we want to negotiate trade deals individually with every state in the world without trade negotiators, and it's taken the world's best trade negotiators 9 years to negotiate a deal with Canada, we're looking long term to
So you
find
don't think we
anything.
could do it in the 35 days remaining?
I'd be surprised. I mean,
But
I
we're
don't
Britain,
mean to
come on,
sound, I
we're
don't mean
good.
to sound pessimistic, but we're going to have to find some trade negotiators, find some people willing to sign trade deals, check that it's okay with the World Trade Organization, because they need to sign it off. They need to be clear that you're not breaching any other rules. Make sure that it doesn't infringe on any other trade deals, and then it might be okay. But I can't see that happening in the next 35
No.
days. I mean, 2 years was a short window of time to do it. I feel like I've not answered your question. What's going to happen? I suspect long term we will end up with something a bit like the deal that Norway has. I think in the long term we don't want to not be trading with European member states, because something like 85% of our trade is with our European partners. They're the closest countries to us. It's all very well saying, let's trade with Canada, let's trade with Australia, let's go back to the Commonwealth in the days of the Empire. But the truth is, that's a lot of air miles.
True.
And we're all thinking about, try and eat local, spend local. We don't produce enough food to feed ourselves in Britain. Do we want to be importing it from New Zealand? Ideally not. Ideally, we would be trading with our closest neighbours, and that's Europe. So we're going to need some kind of agreement. And the best agreement, really, with Europe is the European Union. They've spent a long time perfecting it. Now, if Britain doesn't want to be involved in the political side of that, then you have a situation where you're applying either what Switzerland has or what Norway has. And in the long term, I think that will be the situation, whether it is the model that either of them have or whether there's a specific British model put together that works specifically for Britain, I'm not sure. But I mean, I think that's what they talk about when they say like Norway plus, Nobody's actually said what that plus or the plus
Extra
will be.
Britishness.
It'll be extra
Sprinkled across the top.
Yeah,
Sprinkling of Britishness.
special trade agreements for Britain, special British things. But that's a long way down the line. If we're talking about what's going to happen on the 30th of March, the day after the big day.
Yeah. Who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows?
It's one of those.
We keep reaching this point. Who knows?
Yeah, you get to a certain point and you can talk about what's
there are some things that we do know.
Yeah.
We do know that lots of these people here are recruiters, they're HR people on the live stream. They've got a workforce in place.
Yep.
Doubtless, lots of those people come from the EU. My job previous to working for Workable, I was head of talent at a startup. We had 108 people, of which we had 35 nationalities represented. That's quite a lot of EU.
Yeah.
And now, the day after the referendum, it was like a day of national mourning. Everyone very sad, very glum faces. So I guess, Louise, coming to you, if you can talk us through how were we doing visas? How are we doing visas?
Yeah.
What's changed? And I guess for you, it must be hard because legal certainty is what you like to deal with.
Yeah.
And is there any certainty at the moment?
There are certainly elements that we can look at and start to plan on a worst case scenario basis and on a best case scenario basis. Now, obviously, that means a lot of investment for businesses on things that might not happen. That costs money. Nobody likes to behave in that manner. But just coming back to what Sarah was talking about before, as a member of the EU, we are signed up to the 4 freedoms. One of those is freedom of movement of people, and that means as a British national we can go and live and work in any of the member states, and each of those EU 27 nationals are able to come to the UK and they are able to work and to live here, and that ultimately is what would change if and when we leave the EU. So there are 2 separate positions at the moment, and I'll talk about perhaps the preferable one first, which is what would happen under the withdrawal agreement that's on the table at the moment. And I think even if that withdrawal agreement was to change substantially, what would happen with people is probably largely the same. So there would be a transitional period. And what that would mean, in essence, is that free movement of people would continue until the end of 2020. Now, that gives employers a long time to be able to sort out the individuals that are already exercising those treaty rights, so meaning they can go and register their presence. They have a means to prove that they are able to live and work in each of those countries. They have an ability to show that they are able to travel. So that clearly is the preferable scenario, that we've got a big lead in time and we've all got an opportunity to be able to protect those individuals. In a no-deal scenario, free movement ends at 11 o'clock on the 29th of March. So that doesn't give us very long to consider all of those people and what it is that they need to be doing right now to protect their position.
So their status they are illegal at that point? Or?
It's not that they're illegal.
I'm going to ask the stupid questions.
It's just that they need to do something, and they need to do something quite quickly. Now, in the UK, we know what it is that individuals are going to have to do. They're going to need to register under the EU settlement scheme. There's been a lot about that in the press this week.
And now there's no fee, is that right? That's the thing that seemed to change.
Yes, that's true. So, like you say, Sarah, I drafted a load of communications on Monday to go out, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they were out of date. So that created an issue for me on Monday evening. Anyway, so in the UK, you wouldn't have to pay the fee from the 30th of March, which means that any individual that wants to apply now, and we're in the third stage of testing, which means that any EU national who has a passport or their dependents that have what's known as a biometric residence permit, it looks like a little credit card, are eligible to go and apply. But until the 30th of March, they still have to pay the fee and then reclaim it back, and we don't know what that procedure looks like. So it's messy.
Should you want to give the government money, you can.
Yes, in short. But it's really those individuals who are British nationals and living in all of the EU member states that I have most concerns about at the moment. So that's 27 different types of registration process, and all of which look slightly different, all of which have different timescales in which those individuals have to register by before you get to the position where they're essentially illegal. So, for example, we do know in Germany they're only going to have 3 months. So I would be concentrating on those individuals who are British nationals based in Germany. And I must add at this point that these schemes aren't necessarily live yet. We just have a very broad outline of what they might look like. In the Netherlands, you've got much longer. It should be a 2-year point that UK nationals have to register their presence. But of course, it's not just individuals who are already in those member states. As recruiters, no doubt you've got people who are looking to start in the coming months. I think it would be savvy at this point to have a look at those individuals, look at their nationalities, if you have that information available to you, and think, is there anybody who is relocating that may need to benefit or would benefit from free movement, and can I relocate them more quickly to take advantage of those provisions whilst they're in place? But of course, you're doing that without actually knowing whether there will be no deal on the 30th of March. And of course, one of the options on the table is an extension to Article 50.
And if Article 50 extends, we're just going to proceed in this same...
Free movement would exist until whatever date they put that Article 50 expires on.
Wow. So again, we don't know. This is good. This is every route we go down, we get to a little point of I don't know. It's fine. So there's the employees I currently have, there's the people I want to recruit, or could recruit this year. There's also a third group of people who work for businesses remotely in the EU. Do we know anything about their statuses, or is that going to be one of 27 different settlement statuses that could exist in those countries? So
again, it goes back to the withdrawal agreement and what that says. So there is provision for, say, a frontier worker who might live in one member state and work in another. And one of the things that I should have mentioned perhaps about wherever you may get a residence permit is it's only where you live and not necessarily where you work. So there might be a separate registration process for going through for looking at frontier workers, and that would be how you would have to remote work in the future.
Good Lord. Frontier worker sounds amazing, by the way. It makes me think of an old gold prospector. So up until now, we've been thinking about migrants to the UK as very low-paid, low-skilled workers. Is that a fair reflection from what you've seen, the people who are immigrating to the UK? Is that, if for both of you really, that question?
Well, not from my perspective. I think about, in my team at the university, there's 6 of us work in politics. 4 are EU migrant workers. They might consider themselves low paid, but I don't think they're low skilled. My vet, my cat's vet, is from Romania. When I had my children, the obstetrician was from Poland. My dentist is from Eastern Europe. These are highly skilled jobs, and they'll be allowed to stay, definitely. But if we're losing people moving into Britain into those positions, we suddenly have a situation where we're going to have to retrain or train an awful lot of British workers to do those jobs, and that's in all sectors, I would say. I mean, certainly at the university level. Universities have always looked to just employ the best person for the job, which I'm sure as recruiters you all want to employ the best person for the job. The best person for the job might not be in Britain. That's the case. And so no, the low-skilled, low-paid worker idea of that's who comes from Europe just isn't the case. And then there's also the case that there's some lower-paid jobs that are considered perhaps low-skilled, but aren't. I live in Kent. Last spring, suddenly farmers in Kent discovered that there was very few people in Kent. Well, basically, there was a 1,500 person shortage to pick fruit, and especially pick asparagus. It turns out that's actually quite a highly skilled job, and 9 out of 10 fruit and vegetable harvesters in Kent were from Europe, considered migrant workers. That's not a highly paid job, but it's a highly skilled job, and it's billions in our economy, the fruit and vegetable sector.
So perhaps that is a common misconception then that we're seeing.
These are important jobs. They might not be well paid. Fish processing, vegetable and fruit picking, packaging. The food and beverage industry is huge in Britain. And then a lot of that goes on to be exported to Europe as well. So you're losing out doubly if you can't bring migrant workers in, and then you can't export the products back out.
So we've got these groups. I'm trying to think back to my personal experience of having these sad people sat in a room. Is there anything we can offer them? Any sort of benefit? What sort of kindness can we offer them from an HR perspective? Are there any assurances we can give EU workers at the moment?
I think the best thing that employers can do, and my answer has changed from Monday, is to show that they're on top of the registration schemes, that they can help in terms of either directing queries, provision of support in terms of making those applications. It's now looking like it's not going to be financial. There's certainly a pressure on all of those EU member states to echo what the UK has done and to abolish any application fees. But it's really communicating with those individuals who are impacted and showing them the way in which it is that they can apply. So there's obviously a number of ways in which you can communicate with those particular schemes in terms of the advice that you provide. It could be directing them to the government website. It could be providing legal support, guides, webinars, all of those sorts of things which show that you care and you are considering the position of the individuals that you employ right at this moment, and that you want them to stay.
When we spoke before this, we talked a little bit about getting involved from our standpoint and being heard as employers and getting involved with external lobbyist groups. Do either of you have any guidance there? How should we go about getting our voices heard?
I think at the moment, from my standpoint, which is obviously an immigration one, is that there is a new immigration regime that will go live from autumn of 2020 to deal with the fact that there will be far many more processes to go through when all EEA nationals need to apply for a visa to come to the UK. So that white paper is currently on the table. All through the document, it talks about consulting with businesses on very specific points within that white paper, salary level being the most prevalent. At this stage, I would say it's gathering your data, so looking at what that white paper says, and we can talk about that in a moment, how it would impact your business and checking that you have that data so it's reportable. They haven't yet said exactly what it is they want to hear from businesses, but if you do have a sort of government liaison point, feeding into them at this early stage and reminding them that these consultations are upcoming, and it would be fantastic to be a part of them and have your voice heard.
And Sarah, you made a point before when we were talking about some of these grassroots organisations, about how you can become, I guess, stick your head above the parapet and become a little political about this if you have that viewpoint. Any advice you can offer there for people?
Well, it doesn't, whether you are pro-Remain or pro-Leave, it doesn't immunise you against it being difficult. Yeah. So, you say, I don't want to become political on this, but it's important that as employers and as recruiters, you have your voice heard. And if you think the processes look very difficult, write to your MP and tell them that you think the processes look like they're going to be overly difficult. There's been people sort of campaigning against Brexit or campaigning for Brexit. Perhaps now what you need to be thinking is much more specifically look at the MPs who are working on these processes for recruitment and employment and write specifically to them. Keep an eye out for the consultations coming up, or ask your government liaison to keep an eye out for them. And just be heard. And then, if you do have strong stay or leave ideas, then get involved. Say what you think the problems are.
Very diplomatic.
Yes.
I mean,
I think it's diplomatic. Yeah.
That's good. It's good. So I guess one of the biggest things that I always lived by when I was HR director was, what's everyone else doing? Let me look at what best practice is. And best practice is often other people's solutions to problems that I might have some of, which I could steal bits from and adjust. As someone who advises a lot of these businesses, what are businesses out there doing at the moment? Have you seen anything that's really useful that we could steal, in fact?
A whole raft of things. So there have obviously been those have been hugely engaged in Brexit right from the start, and those of which who are really only opening their eyes to it now and thinking about what it is that might impact them. So I think this goes back to sort of the kind of three different areas to look at, so that immediate term. So perhaps if you were to take, what could I do this afternoon? It's to go back and think about what would the impact of no deal be on my population, and what can I do to mitigate that risk? So first of all, looking at any potential new starters and thinking about whether or not, if they need to move country, would they have the ability to work, and could they take advantage of those free movement provisions. It's also about in a sort of short term, considering the people that you have already employed, so your EEA nationals in the UK, your UK nationals in the EU, and then longer term, looking about what your recruitment strategy ought to be into the future. Now in Europe, that's probably going to be British nationals needing to apply under the schemes that are in place in the EU 27. For the UK, that's going to be slightly different. In a no-deal scenario, who knows, it might be applying under Tier 2. That's going to create real problems for anybody that recruits in anything in a sort of low, I say low-skilled in inverted commas because I share your view that I think that's quite condescending and not reflective, or low-paid roles. It may be that actually moves to just a registration process, but it's one of the big question marks. But it's plotting out that strategy over a 3-year period, and perhaps mapping your timeline to what the governments look like. Although, let's face it, that's not exactly entirely clear at this stage either.
Could be a different government by then.
Well, that's very true.
So I guess for recruiters and HR people in these organisations have a very unfair lot. I sympathise, or empathise, I used to be there, and it was much more, you're often looked to for support from people in the organisation, but also for guidance from your senior leaders as well. So for our people watching and in the room, how do you indicate to the senior leaders that you know what you're talking about as well? Are there things that we can communicate upwards to them? Does that look like a plan, something we could produce to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a change management plan is a really good idea. And I would base that around 5 general points. So I think as part of that, you are identifying who your populations are. And first of all, that is actually knowing who your impacted populations are. So it is knowing who your EEA nationals in the UK are, who your UK nationals in Europe are. And once you have that information, you're able to communicate with those individuals effectively, and you're able to analyse your data so that you're able to go to your senior leadership and you can say, okay, we have, for example, in the UK, we have this particular department that is staffed by this many European nationals. Is that by fluke or is it by design? Perhaps there's some sort of language ability connected to a certain type of a role, and what can we do in terms of mitigating that? But in terms of your plan, I think it's mapping out who, in terms of senior leadership, needs to know, who needs to be kept informed, and do you need to go a little bit further than that and actually educate. So it could be your C-suite, you could be saying, I've got this. This is my very basic 5-point plan. To finance, perhaps you need to say, actually, we are going to have to recruit by 2021 this many European nationals. It's going to cost an extra roughly this amount of money. Can you factor that into your business planning going forward? And then for line managers, say, you have a European population of this many. There is going to be a new immigration scheme that will come in by the end of 2021, and whatever it may be, and the envisaged scheme is actually quite positive, it is going to be slower and it is going to be more expensive. So you need to factor into your recruitment that you could easily be waiting 6 weeks from the point of giving somebody an offer just by virtue of waiting for that visa.
So the time to hire could be massively affected as well. We'll have to factor these things in.
Yeah.
From the people that you're doing or you're working with at the moment out there in the wider world, what's their sort of take on training British talent as opposed to importing that talent?
Well, they're certainly not adverse to it. and when you look at how much it costs to employ somebody who has a visa requirement, so for example, somebody that is employed under Tier 2 for 5 years, the latest costing that I gave to a client was over £9,000 in visa fees alone. Wow. So not including anything else. Businesses don't go to that as it's not a cheap means of getting labour, and I think that's a very common misconception. Yeah. But in terms of training up British nationals, when I speak to my clients, they say that isn't something that we can do in 2 years. It actually starts far earlier than that, and it starts in school curriculums. So if you thought about some sort of engineering professions, it's the skills aren't there because the basics aren't taught in schools, the courses aren't offered at universities, and it's not that British people couldn't do them, but there's perhaps an awareness that certain skills don't exist. Yeah. And it is that we need the foreign talent to train up our UK talent.
Yeah, so perhaps not the answer immediately.
No, there is merit in it, but I don't think that is an immediate solution. That is not going to make you 2021 ready. Not
within the next 65 days.
No.
So, for the people here, those listening in, there's sort of the action plan now. I think every route we've explored to we don't know. Like, what if we go this way? I don't know. What about this way? I don't know.
I would love to have been able to come with some answers.
Yeah,
and I thought I might be able to when you asked me along, but it's become more and more complicated.
It just changes all the time.
It's changed daily
so I guess
for the last couple of weeks.
For those people now, what should we be doing? Right, we leave here, we go back to our desks this afternoon. what should we be doing this afternoon? What happens in a month's time? What happens in after that? So this afternoon, what should we do? Have a drink, yeah?
I think all anybody can do is carry on at the moment. As Louise was saying, reassure your colleagues, reassure people who are working for you that, you've got an eye out for them, that you're keeping an eye on what's happening, that you care. Otherwise, it's a waiting game. Hopefully by next week we should have a slightly clearer idea of whether we're heading towards the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May has put forward, or whether we are really heading towards crashing out with no deal at all, which I think is looking more and more possible, to be honest. Preparing for Theresa May's deal is impossible at the moment because we don't know what it's going to look like. And preparing for no deal, I would say, is almost impossible because we don't know what it's going to look like. So I think everybody has to sit tight and just carry on.
Keep calm, carry on.
Keep calm and carry on. And I hate that idea that we can make this all okay by being British and keeping a stiff upper lip and, Dunkirk spirit and all that. But I think for now, we might just have to, because there's very little that we can do at this moment that is going to change the outcome at all. You can make things slightly easier for the people who work for you, but you can't change whatever the process is going to be in April. And I think the government has left everybody in a really terrible position. A lot of big businesses, good businesses, have been based in Britain. Look, I'm sure most of you will have seen that Dyson's headquarters have left yesterday. It's uncertainty. Business hates uncertainty, and it obviously is looking more certain in other countries. A lot of the banking sector have moved their headquarters out of the City of London. Dyson have moved, other companies as well, like much smaller ones that are still very large. And that's because of the uncertainty that's coming. I don't know what you can do to make it better. I don't know if you've got any ideas, Louise.
I think it was just harping back to the point about being prepared for a no deal. And I think if there was one message to take away, it is looking at ensuring that you've got the data, that you know who it is that you're talking about. So that you are able to communicate with the right people at the right time. So it's looking out for those registration schemes in Europe for British nationals, and it's making your EEA population in the UK aware that the settled status scheme is in its third stage of the pilot, and it is open for most people. Most European nationals will have a passport and an ability to apply. Whether or not you want to go through the process of applying and reclaiming your fee is a totally personal decision for the individual. But once you've obtained your registration, so your settled or pre-settled status, you're obviously in the very best possible position to be able to ensure that you can travel in April. That if you changed employers, you would have a document to show your ability to work here. Later down the line, if you want to open a bank account or rent a house or any of those things, you're ready with your document. So certainly I've been saying in a gentle manner to my clients, I would encourage your European population in the UK to use that scheme now. And actually one sort of positive message from that is that we had someone apply on Monday. We were expecting a 2 to 3 week wait time, and it was approved on Tuesday. So perhaps that's one good thing of having to pay and reclaim the fee, that other people aren't doing it. So there is an opportunity.
There's a lot of other things, though, that come on the back of that seem to be very difficult as well. My colleague applied for settled status, got it very quickly. Was then informing his car insurance company that he would be going to Germany post-Brexit. Told them, he's been very honest about it. He's German, he wants to be organised, quite efficient in things. And they were like, well, we can't send you the external to the EU green card for taking your car to Germany because we don't know what that's going to look like. Wow. And he was like, well, so what should I do? And they were like, well, actually, looking at this, your driving licence might not be valid either. post-Brexit because you've got a German driving licence. So he said, well, I've got the settled status. Does that not mean my driving licence remains valid as well? I said, no, probably not. You may well have to retake the driving test. And so this was, I can't remember which car insurance company it was. It was my colleague's car insurance company. But suddenly all these questions that although he's got the settled status, it doesn't settle all the questions.
No.
So there's going to be a lot of questions still being asked that people may well go to HR about, even though it's not necessarily a recruitment or an employment question. So what on earth do I do with my driving licence? So I think there's a lot of auxiliary questions that are going to come up that we haven't really thought of yet. I mean, as I say, my colleague hadn't thought about the fact that his driving licence might not be valid. He really just wanted to know whether
he was going to be insured.
Whether he was insured to go to Germany. So there's a lot of questions that I think we haven't thought of yet. Yeah.
It's the unknown unknowns.
The unknown unknowns, yes.
So lastly, I think, before we get to Q&A, there was another question around, and we sort of discussed this before when we were planning, this. It has been quite factious, this, and I think more so than any other political debate or anything, certainly in my memory, and my working memory for sure, that the pendulum has swung from both sides. We've got quite angry factions on both sides. See, diplomatic. Yeah. How do we mitigate an organisation which is now split in two? So we've got some people who might be working with us who are very pro, some people who are very anti. I guess HR has to remain impartial.
I think HR has to prepare, so in the way that Louise has commented, think about the ways of going forward, think about actual, facts, sort of hard facts on the ground. We have this many EU nationals working for us, we have this many employees working in the EU, this is the process, and try not to become involved with the political side of it. As I said, whether you're leave or remain, it doesn't immunise you against it being difficult. So saying, well, I voted leave and I got what I wanted, you're not going to somehow have an easier ride than somebody who voted remain. You know, your business could still be laying off workers. It's still going to be difficult. We still don't know what's going to happen. It's not going to be straightforward for either side. And I think you need to in the next couple of months, somehow we're going to have to try and sidestep our political, what were our political ambitions 2 years ago, and say, well, just how are we going to make this work?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think perhaps it's moving the question away from the referendum, and it's more about, it doesn't matter which way you voted, if you are a European national in our business or a UK national in Europe, you are welcome, you are valued, and we absolutely want to retain your talent, and we are looking for ways that we are able to behave in the same way that we do now, and recruit a diverse and valued workforce, looking for, as you say, the very best individuals to fulfill those roles. Excellent.
So I think we've got through most of what we had prepared. I wanted to open up to the floor for questions, and I think we've got Carolyn's email has just been abused by 500 people. I think, good. So we've probably got some questions there as well. Whitney's roving with the mic. Do please wait till you get the mic. This is obviously being filmed. That's what those cameras are. So if you object afterwards, you're probably too late to object. Or just hide your faces. Go for it. Any questions from our audience? Next one.
Hi there. I'm Henry. Thanks for that. It was really good. I have one quick question. If we don't get a deal, which it looks like is very, very possible, would you advise a hard stop on EU recruitment up until we know what's happening?
I definitely wouldn't advise a hard stop on EU recruitment, because first of all, you would probably fall foul of discrimination legislation, and second of all, you deny yourself an enormous talent pool. I think what you need to do is to be able to manage the expectation of the individual and of the manager that you are recruiting for. So if, for example, and let's take an EA national that's either coming to or lives in the UK, if they are already in the UK, they would have an ability to register their status and to be able to continue to work in the UK. For an individual who is based overseas and coming to the UK, if they can do that before the 29th of March, brilliant, get them in and get them to benefit from those free movement provisions. Now, if there is a no deal and if Article 50 does expire and we do leave the EU on the 29th of March, and I think there are some big ifs in there, it's unclear as to who it is, what process a person might have to go through in order to be able to come to the UK. So very worst case scenario is that they would have to apply under the current immigration regime. So most likely under Tier 2, whereby a company would sponsor an individual to come and work in the UK. I'll just go on if I may, to sort of slightly expand that question into what a new immigration regime is going to look like in the future, because certainly under the withdrawal agreement, the idea is that free movement will exist, and by the time it doesn't, this new immigration regime will be in place, so that it should be frictionless into this new immigration regime. So the white paper was published back in December, so it is a white paper, it's just a statement of ideas of what that might look like. And I think what was really positive about it is that there was no individual that I could think of that I couldn't put anywhere, although there were very, very few. So some of the things that it suggested changing: first of all, as we expected, the EU nationals would be treated as any other non-EU national in the UK. They would abolish the resident labour market test. They would abolish the cap on Tier 2 generals. So anybody that deals with this quite regularly, there was a Conservative manifesto pledge that they would cap numbers on immigration. It's failed fairly spectacularly, but it does exist. They would also reduce the skill level at which an individual could be sponsored in the UK. So rather than it being at degree level, it would come down to A level. So there's a whole raft of individuals that couldn't be sponsored that now could be sponsored. So that's hugely positive news. I think where there is more of a gap is, again, in this sort of low-skilled, low-paid area. To use an example, my son's wonderful Hungarian nursery nurse who controls 8 3-year-olds and gets my son to put his coat on. I class her as highly, highly skilled, but that's my own personal viewpoint, wouldn't qualify under that new system. So there are certainly gaps. So what's there in its place for those style roles is a transitional visa that would be in place until 2020. And that would include, but not be limited to, anything that is deemed in a low-skilled category. Now, with that, a person could come to the UK for 12 months, and then they would need to go back outside of the UK for another 12-month period, and they couldn't re-enter in a worker category. It's known as a cooling-off period. Again, that's one of the things that I would suggest that businesses who do recruit in that sort of area might want to be part of a consultation. I foresee issues in terms of seasonal work. Why couldn't we have 6 months, 6 months? That would seem to be far more sensible to me. Another area is around a salary threshold. The white paper envisages that being set at 30,000. That might be fine in London, certainly in some of the regions that's far, there'll be degree level, people employed at degree level that won't meet that salary threshold. So again, I would encourage you, if you can, to consult with the government through whichever mechanism you choose to go about that. So I hope that answers the question. I think I've possibly gone a bit further, but I think they're all quite important points to make.
Questions on email?
Sure. So this actually kind of goes off the point that you just touched on, but it's more from the candidate perspective. Would you say it's risky for EU citizens to apply for jobs in the UK right now? And if so, which industries?
We keep deferring to you, so I know you were looking back to us. Risky?
I could empathise with a European national who felt that they were put off by applying for a UK-based job right at this moment. However, I think from a recruiter standpoint, we don't want that shouldn't be our message. We ought to be encouraging everybody to continue to apply for roles. I think where perhaps we need to manage expectation is in terms of how long it might take for you to be able to start a given role. Now, certainly it's perhaps wise in the below degree level type roles to have a conversation to say, if you are successful in this role, we aren't yet certain in a no deal scenario what would happen in terms of you being able to relocate to the UK, and we would do everything that we could to facilitate your move to the UK and to be as encouraging and reassuring as you could. But I don't think we can be blind to the fact that when you have a political hot potato, as Brexit is proving to be, that it might be off-putting, certainly to European candidates who simply don't know what it is that they might need to do if they had a start date in April.
Can I just come in there? We, at the university, and my team, were advertising for a new permanent post, which in academia is, it's not unusual, but you normally go in for a sort of temporary post and then a permanent post. But it was decided that we'd advertise for a permanent post just now because it would seem more attractive to people. And as I said before, like 4 out of our team of 6 are European. The last time we recruited, we had over 120 applicants, and a lot of them from EU member states. This time we had 15. And the last time it was for a fixed term position, this time it's permanent. I know it's only, it's an anecdote, it's anecdotal, but I think what we're going to see is we just don't have candidates applying here. We were looking for somebody...
Because of that fear, the uncertainty.
Because of the fear, the uncertainty of what's going to happen. So we're looking for somebody who can teach quantitative methods, so somebody who does maths in politics. There's nobody has applied, and so we've just lost the whole of that EU applicant base. They just have not applied.
I wonder how long it will be until we see the job ads and say at the bottom the same caveat for anti-discrimination, that same caveat for if you are an EU national, we will support you through this process and go on to support you. That may be a way to mitigate that in very real terms.
I think at the moment just the uncertainty is difficult. You don't want to take on a job, move up sticks, maybe move your family. And the other thing is, an academic job, you have to be educated to PhD level, but you would have a starting salary under 30,000.
Yeah.
So there are these jobs that are considered highly skilled, I suppose, but would not, as you said, the consultancy needs to look into these more carefully because they're not necessarily
the salary threshold
paid.
is being a blunt force instrument in this case, isn't it?
Yeah, so that could mean somebody moving to Britain only to discover in 2 months' time that it hasn't worked.
They don't meet some new criteria.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Another question?
Hi, my name's Michelle. I wanted to ask about the white paper. You mentioned before that there will be some changes. Is that if there's a no deal, that's definitely the things are going to change, or that's just a if and when and maybe these are the proposals?
No, provided there is a Brexit, there will be a new immigration system that will go live from autumn 2020. So it's envisaged that the current immigration system that's in place, so Tier 2 sponsorship, wouldn't be able to withstand the numbers that it will deal with European nationals. And also we need to cater in a different way for the labour market. So that's being looked at. That's what the white paper is. It goes live in autumn of 2020 so that employers have got enough time to get individuals that will start in very early 2021 a permission.
One more from the audience.
Hi, I'm Steve. Just trying to understand, is there a time
period of how long an EU national's been within the UK where they are automatically accepted or application? I'm just trying to understand this time frame. So let's say someone's been here 20 years versus 5 years.
Yep. So if you have been here for 5 years, you will be awarded what's called settled status, which is a bit like permanent residency. If you live in the UK, as of the 29th of March 2019, so you are essentially working, but it could be in a different status, you would be eligible to apply for pre-settled status. So it's all about you coming to the UK to live by that particular date. So actually somebody that moves on the 29th would still be able to apply under the EU settlement scheme. Does that answer the question?
We have a few more from our friends watching the live stream. This next one is, recruiters in HR are going to be responsible for their employer brand and the communication that is marketed internally and externally. How would you advise recruiters and HR professionals to communicate this in their brand?
In their brand?
In their brand, for me, I think it would be making that reassurance explicit. So as I said, you could write in your job ads, for example, which is where employer brand happens more than anywhere. Apologies to people making lovely brand videos and stuff like that, but people still see plain text on Indeed.com before they go to your lovely website and see the lovely video that you've made. So in that, I would state explicitly, we welcome applications from EU nationals. This is what we will do to support you. This is how much we love you. That kind of stuff. I would make it absolutely 100% explicit, which is what I would do as a recruiter to try and beat all of you guys as recruiters. So for all of the uncertainty and doubt that you're peddling, I would say reassurance and calm. It might not be true at the moment, but I would go for reassurance and calm from my employer, and then you guys, oh, look at you crazy guys, you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just to echo those sentiments, I think once people are in that pipeline and you've started talking to them, it will become easier and easier, because as they get further into the process, they've spoken to you more, they've learned more about the business, they know things aren't going to fold. And I guess being authentic to yourself and saying, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to support you through the things that we don't know, is going to be a lot better than saying, which is what I think a lot of us are saying at the moment.
And I guess this is where things have changed from Monday, because obviously there were a whole raft of employers that came out saying, we are going to pay for all of our employees to get settled or pre-settled status. We will meet those costs for you. And that in itself was a great exercise.
It was quite nice, yeah.
Exactly. And now obviously it is a positive thing that you don't have to pay for your application, but you've lost that kind of financial...
The weight that came behind, we will do this for you,
Yeah. But I don't think there's any way that British companies will stop employing EU nationals, because they are our closest neighbours. There's a huge skill set. There's skills that are just traditionally employed in Britain from other member states. So although it'll be difficult, I envisage it being difficult for a period of time, but it's not going to continue to be difficult. Something will be worked out. At the moment, it's unclear what that something is, and that's the problem. It's the lack of clarity. So it's not a situation where you should be saying, we can't employ EU nationals. It's going to be awful. But I think for the next couple of months, it might be fairly difficult. And that's the time when you need to reassure people, both people that you're looking to recruit and people who are already working for you, that, you know, stick with us. It'll work out. It's got to work out.
Should we do one more question, and then I know you've probably got the rest of your days to get on with, so we'll have to stop at some point.
I have one more that we've had a few questions about any resources that you as experts could point to. And I wanted to mention that the team at Workable is working on 5 things specifically for recruiters that you can do right now, and we're going to partner with Louise on that. And we also have a few other pieces of content, so you can check out our resources page. And I know you also mentioned the white paper.
Yeah, so Fragment, do you produce Any guidance for us? Can we look to your resources as well?
Yes, absolutely you can, for a fee.
It's fair.
No, we do have a Brexit microsite, which I would be very happy to share
Excellent.
with you. It has lots of guides that we have produced. So the latest one being on the white paper. The white paper is a document stretching to nearly 200 pages. We've condensed it to 4, so you might want to start with that.
Slightly more readable.
Just slightly, I hope.
Yeah, and you know, the internet's a wonderful resource, but you have to remember that not everything you read on the internet is correct, and not everything you read on the internet is 100% tailored to you as well. So that's why companies like Fragomen, you know, I'll do my bit of plugging here as well. We have a Centre for European Studies that can actually offer like tailored reports, or you know, tailored analyses of the things that are important to you. Again, for a fee, but you know, sometimes it is worth looking more specifically at the information there, because the internet contains an awful lot of fear-mongering and concerned people.
Yeah, absolutely. So to echo what Carolyn said, Workable are producing, by registering today, you already will receive this, the recording that we're doing right now, that I'm messing up, and also some other content that we're producing, 5 ways you can get ready for this stuff to happen, and I think we're partnering with you guys on some content as well, and we could all do this again next week after the vote, and the week after, and the week after. I think, should we stop there? Yes, nods from the back. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you all for coming. Most of all, thank you to Louise and to Sarah for being with us and proving that we're not all tired of experts. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience and to the live stream. So thanks very much. Bye.
Please enjoy some tea, coffee, and pastries downstairs.